Vivid verses.
The call came on a Tuesday, which I remember because I had just made coffee and was standing at the kitchen window watching the light change across the rooftops. Not the kind of dramatic light that makes you think about your life. Just ordinary morning light, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. Hi, sorry to bother you. My name is Tom Ashford. I'm calling because I've been in contact with a woman named Cara Lennox about purchasing an apartment, and she gave me this number as the owner. I just wanted to confirm a few details before we proceed. I held my mug with both hands, kept my voice completely level. What details did you need? There was a brief pause. He seemed surprised I hadn't already corrected the premise. Well, she's asking for $5,000 deposit by Friday. Said the sale would complete within 6 weeks. I got my wife here too. We've been looking for 18 months, and this seemed. Mr. Ashford, I said, what is the address she showed you? He read it back to me. My address. My apartment. The one I owned outright. I see, I said. I appreciate you calling. Can I ask, did she show you inside the property? She did. Last Saturday. It's a lovely place. I set the mug down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands want to do something else entirely. Mr. Ashford, I want to be straightforward with you. I am the owner of that property. It is not for sale. I would strongly advise you not to transfer any funds. Would you be willing to provide me your contact details? A solicitor may need to reach you. The silence on his end lasted several seconds. Then his wife said something I couldn't quite hear, and he came back. She told us she'd inherited it. She showed us the deed. Of course she did. A copy of a deed is not difficult to produce. The land registry will confirm ownership if you check. My name is Owen Calloway, and I've owned this property for 7 years. He thanked me, said he'd look into it. I could hear in his voice the particular mixture of embarrassment and relief that comes from almost doing something irreversible. I finished my coffee standing at the counter. I didn't pace, didn't make another call yet. I just stood there and let myself understand fully what had happened, because I've learned that the first 10 minutes after a revelation are important. You can spend them on anger, which burns fast and leaves you acting on emotion rather than information, or you can spend them on clarity. I chose clarity. Her name was Cara. We'd been together long enough that I'd made the mistake of trusting her completely, which is a very particular kind of mistake, the kind that has no warning signs except in retrospect, when you look back and see that the warning signs were simply the person themselves, just not yet at full volume. She was charming in the way that some people are charming, efficiently, usefully, and without it costing her anything. I had found it attractive. Most people did. The spare room had been empty for a year before she moved in. I had no particular attachment to it. When she suggested that a friend of hers needed a place for a few months, I said fine. When she said she'd handle the arrangement directly, I said fine. She had a detail-oriented mind, and I trusted her with things that didn't require my attention. That was the architecture of the mistake. Not a single dramatic error, just a series of small permissions, each of them individually reasonable, that together produced something quite unreasonable. I hadn't checked the room much. I had my own work, my own rhythms. She stayed over often enough that the apartment felt occupied, lived in, the way apartments are supposed to feel. What I had not known, what I discovered that Tuesday morning, sitting at my desk with the phone still warm in my hand, was that the friend had left after 2 months, and the room had subsequently been rented to 3 different people in succession, all through a short-let platform under Cara's name, all generating income that had flowed into Cara's account, none of it disclosed. 8 months of this. I'm not a sentimental person by nature, but I had been, with her, more open than was perhaps advisable. I had not thought of it as vulnerability. I'd thought of it as partnership. She had mistaken that openness for softness. That was her first error, and ultimately her most consequential one. I opened my laptop and started a document. It took me 4 hours to reconstruct the timeline for what I had available. Emails I'd half-read, platform notification emails I'd ignore because she'd said she was managing the room, a bank statement from the household account that showed a cleaning fee sheet expense that I'd assumed was for the main flat. I cross-referenced dates. I built a chronology. I was methodical about it the way I am methodical about things that matter. Not frantically, not with the shaking hands of someone in crisis, but with the focused patience of someone who understands that the quality of the documentation will determine the quality of the outcome. At 11 p.m., I emailed my solicitor, Richard, a brief summary with the document attached. Richard, something has come up that needs your attention. Short version, ex-partner has been subletting my spare room without authorization for 8 months under her name. Today I received a call from a couple she had shown the apartment to as a prospective sale. She represented herself as the owner. The subletting income appears to total somewhere around £14,000. I like to understand my options. Timeline attached. I closed the laptop and went to bed. This is something I've noticed about myself. I sleep well when I've made a decision, even a difficult one. It's the indecision that keeps me awake. And by the time I sent that email, the decision was made. Not the specifics, those would come, but the essential choice that I would handle this completely, leave nothing unresolved, and not permit Kara to walk away from this, treating it as one of those situations that simply fade because no one presses them. Those situations fade because the wrong party convinces themselves that the trouble of pressing isn't worth it. I was about to demonstrate that I had a different view. Richard called at 8 a.m. "This is quite a situation," he said. He was never a man who wasted words on reassurance, which was why I used him. "I know. The subletting is a clear breach if she had no written authorization. The prospective sale is more serious. That's potentially fraud. I know. How would you like to proceed?" I had thought about this carefully. Kara was not, at her core, stupid. She was reckless in the way that people are reckless when they've never faced a consequence. But she was not unintelligent, and she had in her life collected people who managed things for her. There would be a solicitor by the end of the week. There would be an attempt at some kind of counter-narrative. There might even be tears, though I suspected she'd save those for someone more susceptible. "I want to change the locks today," I said. "Professionally, with a locksmith documented. I want her belongings packed by a removal company. Impersonal, no damage, no drama. And placed in a storage unit I'll pay for through the end of the month. I'll provide her the key and the address. And I want everything we have on the subletting in order before she's even aware this is happening." Richard was quiet for a moment. "She may claim tenancy rights. I'd be surprised if she doesn't. What do we have? With 8 months of rental records in her name, a property history showing she was your partner and not a declared tenant, and 2 witnesses who saw her represent herself as the owner for a sale. Her position is not strong. But we need those witnesses willing to provide statements. I'll call Tom Ashford this morning." "Good. In the meantime, I'll draft a letter before noon. Are you at the property now?" "Yes. I'd suggest you don't leave until the locksmith is done." I was already looking up locksmiths. I called Tom Ashford at 9:15. He had already checked the land registry. He sounded, if anything, more shaken than the day before. The gap between what could have happened and what had happened apparently wider in the daylight. "We nearly transferred the deposit," he said. "We had the bank details ready. I understand. I'm sorry this happened to you. What will happen to her?" I considered the question. "That's not entirely up to me. But I want you to know, you won't face any consequences. You nearly became the victim of fraud. If a solicitor needs a statement from you, would you be willing?" He said yes without hesitating. His wife said yes even faster from somewhere in the background. The locksmith arrived at 10:30. He was a quiet, competent man who didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. The removal company came at 1 p.m. 3 of them, efficient and systematic, moving through the spare room and the sections of the flat where Kara's things had accumulated over time. A scarf on a hook, books arranged on a shelf, a collection of small ceramic objects she kept on the windowsill. They packed everything with the same neutral professionalism they'd have given to a vacated office, which is exactly what I wanted. Not cruelty, not theater, just completion. I wrote the note by hand, a single line on a card. The unit is paid through the end of the month. I included the storage facility address and the key, placed it in an envelope with her name on the front. Then I sat at the kitchen table and sent her text. Your belongings have been moved to storage. Key and address are in an envelope at the front desk of the building. Ask Paul at reception. The storage is paid through month end. Richard Haynes is acting for me. Please direct any further communication through your solicitor. I read it over twice. It was clear. It was not unkind. It contained no accusations, no heat, no invitation to negotiate. It was the kind of message that communicates, in its very flatness, that the person sending it has already moved 3 steps beyond the conversation the recipient is expecting to have. I pressed send and went to make lunch. She called 4 times in the next 2 hours. I did not answer. She texted twice. The first message long, layered, moving quickly from confusion to indignation to something approaching threat. The second message shorter. Owen, this is insane, call me. I read them both, noted the escalation pattern, confusion first, then anger, then the attempt to reset to normalcy, and didn't respond. There was nothing useful for me to say. Everything I needed to communicate had been communicated. Anything I added would only give her material to work with, and I had decided to give her nothing she hadn't already received. She showed up at the building at 4 p.m. I know this because Paul at reception texted me. Woman downstairs asking for you. Says she's your partner. Should I send her up? I replied, please let her know that communication is through Solicitors. She has the envelope. Paul, who had worked the front desk for 6 years and understood discretion, did exactly that. I watched from the window as she walked back to her car. From 4 floors up, I couldn't read her face, but I could read her posture, the particular way a person holds themselves when they are in a situation that is not going the way they planned, when the architecture they built their confidence on has developed cracks they didn't see coming. She had planned, I think, for a conversation, a confrontation, something she could manage with presence and with words, the 2 tools she was best at. I had declined to provide either. The message from her solicitor arrived the following Monday. A woman named Helena Marsh, whose firm I recognized as competent but not exceptional. The letter was formal and measured, which told me Helena had probably advised Kara to be careful. The substance of it was that Kara intended to assert a degree of occupancy over the property that might, in her view, entitle her to notice and proper process, that the removal of her belongings and the changing of the locks may have constituted unlawful eviction, and that they requested a response from my solicitor within 7 days. I forwarded it to Richard and called him. What do you think? I said, I think she's hoping you'll settle to make it go away. The unlawful eviction angle is creative but thin. She was your partner, not a declared tenant, never paid rent to you, never held a tenancy agreement. The room she occupied with you was the main bedroom, not the spare room she was subletting. Yes, what they're betting on is that you'd rather pay something small than let this escalate. Then they've misjudged. That's what I assumed. A brief pause. I'll have a response drafted tomorrow. I want to include the platform records. I've had my paralegal pull 8 months of activity from the account she used. It's thorough. 8 months. I thought about that number for a moment. Not with bitterness, exactly, but with the kind of retrospective accounting that you do when you realize a thing was happening in a room adjacent to your life without you knowing. Tuesday evenings when she'd seemed distracted. The occasional message she'd step away to reply to, which I'd taken for work. The small logistical conversations she'd handled without involving me, which I'd taken as efficiency. She had been good at it. I gave her that. Richard's response to Helena Marsh was 12 pages. I read it in full, which I think surprised him. Most clients outsource that particular boredom, but I wanted to understand it precisely. It documented, in sequence, the ownership history of the property, the nature of Kara's residency as a partner rather than a tenant, the 8 months of short-let platform records in her name, showing 22 separate bookings generating £13,840 in rental income, communications from 2 current tenants of the spare room who had received departure requests, drafted by Richard, received without incident, and the full account of Tom and Sarah Ashford. Their names, dates, the bank details Kara had provided them, and a signed statement from both confirming she had represented herself as the property owner. The final section addressed the unlawful eviction claim with a precision that I found genuinely elegant. It noted that the unlawful eviction legislation applied to tenants, that Kara had never been a tenant, that she had, in fact, been operating as a landlord herself on the premises, and that the appropriate regulatory bodies might find that arrangement of considerable interest should she wish to pursue the matter further. The last line was Richard's, unmistakably. Our client has no desire to extend this matter unnecessarily. However, he is entirely prepared to do so. I signed the approval at 9 p.m. and poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, which I drank standing at the kitchen window in the dark. There was a call I didn't expect. Her older sister, Bex, rang on a Thursday evening. We had always gotten along. She was quieter than Kara, more straightforward, the kind of person you could have a real conversation with at the table while everyone else was performing. I had liked her genuinely. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, she's not party to this, and she hasn't earned being ignored. Owen, Bex, a pause. I could hear her measuring her words. I'm not calling for her. I want to be clear about that. Okay. Another pause. I know you, and I know this isn't going to go the way she thinks it is. I wanted you to know I'm sorry for what she did. I stood by the window. This was the kind of call that wants you to soften, to say it's fine, really it's between us, to give a little back so the other person can feel they've helped. I resisted that. I appreciate that, I said. I hope it doesn't put you in a difficult position. She's staying with me right now. A small exhale. She stopped. Started again. She believes she didn't do anything that bad. This didn't surprise me. It didn't anger me either, which I think would have surprised Kara if she'd known. Understand, I said. That's for her solicitor to reason through with her. Owen. Her voice was quieter now. Did you really not know? Any of it? No. God. A silence. She always said you were. She stopped. I was what? She said you were too in your own head. Too trusting. That you didn't notice things. I almost smiled. Too trusting. As though trust were a deficiency. As though the problem with being trusted was that it made you available for this. Tell her something for me, I said. Not on her behalf. Just for me to her, since she's not taking my solicitor's calls. I paused. Tell her I'm not doing this because I'm angry. Tell her I'm doing it because it's correct. A long silence on Bex's end. She won't understand the difference, she said finally. I know. We said goodbye. It was not an unfriendly call, but it was the last one we'd have for some time, and I think we both understood that. Helena Marsh's response to Richard's 12 pages arrived 6 days later. For pages, notably shorter. The tone had shifted, still formal, but with a quality that I recognized as legal retreat, the careful narrowing of claims that happens when counsel has reviewed the opposition's evidence and done the arithmetic. The unlawful eviction claim was not withdrawn, but it was significantly qualified. The tenancy argument had been refined into something smaller and more technical, The kind of argument you make when you're no longer trying to win, but are trying to create enough ambiguity to negotiate. There was a new element, an assertion that Kara had made improvements to the property and was owed some consideration. Richard called when I'd had a chance to read it. The improvements claim is the tell, he said. It means they've looked at everything else and don't like it. What were the improvements? They haven't specified. I assume we'll get a list, some plants she bought, probably. A mirror. Something she'll argue increased the value of your property. I thought of the ceramic objects on the windowsill. The artwork she'd hung in the hallway. 3 prints in matching frames that I'd never particularly liked, but had said nothing about because they mattered to her. What do you advise? I advise we respond by noting that we'd welcome a full accounting of any improvements, alongside a corresponding accounting of the £13,840 in rental income generated from the property without the owner's knowledge or authorization, and that we remain prepared to share our documentation with the appropriate authorities if the matter is not resolved. Do it. Owen, this is almost certainly over. She's got one qualified claim and no leverage. Her solicitor will advise withdrawal. I know, I said. Do it anyway. There was a dinner around that time that had been arranged weeks before any of this happened, a small gathering in my friend Garrett's house. His partner, Fiona, cooked well and invited carefully, so the table was never more than 6 people, never a room full of strangers performing for each other. It was the kind of evening I normally looked forward to. I almost canceled. I was tired in the specific way you're tired when you're using a lot of mental energy on something that doesn't show on the surface. But I went because I have learned that isolation is its own kind of trap, and because Garrett was a friend in the original sense, someone who knew me before I was any particular version of myself. He didn't ask about Kara directly. He'd heard something through the connective tissue of shared acquaintances that things had ended, but he had the decency not to make it the centerpiece of the evening. Fiona sat me next to a woman named Ruth who turned out to be an architect and who talked about buildings with a specificity I found genuinely interesting. The way light moves through a space at different times of year, the way you can engineer an emotion by controlling what someone sees when they first walk through a door. You're controlling the story, I said. She looked at me with a slight smile, as though the word story was an interesting choice. Every building is an argument, she said, about how people should feel. Most people walk through buildings without knowing they're having a feeling someone else designed for them. I thought about that for the rest of the evening. Helena Marsh's final letter was 2 pages. Her client had reviewed the matter with her and had concluded that it was in everyone's interest to resolve the situation without further escalation. Kara was withdrawing the occupancy claims. She would not pursue the improvements argument further. She requested only that the matter proceed no further and that no additional communications be directed to her once this was confirmed. Richard attached a short note to the forwarded email. As I said, over. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a 3rd time, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to sit with what it meant. Not with satisfaction, or not only with satisfaction, but with a kind of precise recognition. The letter meant that every decision I had made in the preceding weeks had been correct. The documentation, the speed, the refusal to engage emotionally, the willingness to go further than she had assumed I would. She had built a structure on what she believed about me, that I was trusting, that I was private, that I disliked conflict, that I would calculate the cost of pursuing something and decide the quiet life was worth the compromise. All of those things were, in their own way, true. She had simply misunderstood what they meant. Trusting does not mean credulous. Private does not mean passive. Disliking conflict does not mean avoiding it when it's necessary. And the calculation I made, every time, in every situation, was never simply, is this worth the trouble? It was, What is the correct thing to do, and am I willing to do it? I was. I always had been. She simply hadn't been paying attention to the right things. I didn't hear from Kara directly after that. She didn't try to call again, didn't send messages through mutual contacts, didn't engineer a coincidental meeting through the overlapping geography of shared lives. I don't know if that was Helena Marsh's advice or her own pride, and I found I didn't particularly need to know. I painted the hallway on a Saturday in early autumn. The previous color had been a warm gray she'd chosen when I'd asked her to pick something. She'd had strong opinions about it, brought home 3 sample pots, deliberated for 2 weekends. It had always been, to me, primarily her color, even though it was my hall. The new color was a dark blue-green, almost teal, the kind of color that absorbs light rather than reflecting it, that makes a hallway feel like a place you pause rather than a place you pass through. I'd chosen it from a card at the paint shop in about 45 seconds, the same way I make most decisions, quickly, with full confidence, without requiring the approval of the room. I did it in 2 coats, cleaned the brushes, stood in the hallway when it was dry, and looked at it in the morning light. The ceramic objects on the windowsill were gone. The matching prints were gone. The scarf hook had been filled and painted over. The spare room had been repainted too. Not by me, by a decorator. In an off-white sewn neutral, it had no personality at all, which was exactly right because it was waiting to be given one by whoever came next. I moved into that room's doorway and stood there for a moment. It was just a room, good proportions, south-facing, 1 window, currently admitting the particular pale gold of an autumn morning that doesn't ask anything of you. I thought of what Ruth had said, that buildings are arguments about how people should feel. And I thought, this room is not an argument yet. It's a space before an argument, a silence before a sentence. I left the door open and went to make coffee. Garrett rang that Sunday. Not about anything important, just one of his intermittent calls where we talk about nothing in particular for 20 minutes, the kind of friendship maintenance that looks effortless because both parties are willing to put in the invisible work. "How are you?" he said. Not the casual version, the other version. "Good," I said. And because it was Garrett, and he'd have known if I were hedging, genuinely. The whole thing with Kara, resolved. Cleanly, I thought about the word, about the 2 pages from Helena Marsh, about the dark teal hallway, about 8 months of rental records in a spreadsheet I had sent to Richard, and which now lived in a folder on my desktop that I had no particular reason to open again. "Yes," I said, cleanly. He was quiet for a moment. "Good. I always thought she was—" He paused. "What?" "Nothing. It's not useful now." "Tell me." Another pause. I thought she was someone who had decided, a long time ago, that being charming was the same as being good. And those people are fine until they're not. I turned my coffee mug in my hands. The morning light was coming through at the angle that means it's still early, the day still in its first few pages. She wasn't malicious, I think, I said. Not defending her, just being accurate. She was opportunistic, and she had never once paid a real cost for it, which had convinced her that she never would. And now she has a solicitor who advised her to withdraw, and a storage unit that she needs to clear before the end of the month, and an understanding, I hope, that her read on the situation was wrong. I paused. That's enough. Is it? I consider the question seriously, because Garrett asked it seriously. Is it enough? The 13,000 pounds she kept gone. The months of it happening under my roof done. The couple who nearly transferred a deposit on an apartment they had no claim to, warned in time. The legal position collapsed. There's nothing left to resolve, I said. That's not the same as everything being made right, but it's what's available. You seem to think about this. You know what I find slightly unsettling about you? Only slightly? You never seem to need people to admit they were wrong. It's not about need, I said. It's about what's achievable. People rarely admit they were wrong in the way you'd want them to. They admit it quietly, privately, in the middle of the night, to themselves, if they admit it at all. Holding out for the public version just keeps you tethered to them. And you don't want to be tethered to her. I don't want to be tethered to anything I've already resolved. He laughed, a short, real one. Right, he said. Fair enough. We talked for another 10 minutes about something entirely different. His work, a trip he was considering, a book Fiona had recommended that he kept meaning to start. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with the last of my coffee and the quiet of a Sunday morning, which is its own particular quality of quiet, unhurried and self-contained. The hallway outside the kitchen was dark teal now. The spare room door was still open. The matter was closed, not because anyone had relented or apologized or arrived at remorse, but because I had built something so complete, so documented, so thoroughly without gaps, that there was simply nothing left to fight. No seam to push against. No assumption I had failed to anticipate. No version of events she could offer that wasn't already accounted for in the record I had assembled on one quiet evening, with a coffee going cold beside the laptop, in the methodical and almost meditative state I enter when something needs to be done correctly. She had mistaken my openness for an absence of attention. She had mistaken my silence for ignorance. She had, ultimately, mistaken me for someone who would calculate the trouble and decide the quiet life was worth the compromise. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, set it on the drying rack with the same care I give to every small thing, and went to face the rest of the day.
Thanks for listening.